Shaq walked into Hartman Capital like any other businessman, but the moment the receptionist saw his hoodie and jeans, she scoffed. "Sir, the maintenance entrance is in the back." The office went quiet. Executives smirked. A few chuckled under their breath. Then CEO Grant Hartman himself strolled over, sizing Shaq up with a sneer. "You have a meeting with me?" He laughed. "That's rich." What Hartman didn't know, Shaq wasn't just here for a meeting. He was here to change everything. What happens next will leave this entire company speechless. Stay till the end, because this is a downfall no one saw coming. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the lavish lobby of Hartman Capital, a firm known for handling multi-billion-dollar investments. Crystal chandeliers gleamed above, their light bouncing off polished marble floors. The air smelled of freshly brewed espresso and old money. Shaquille O'Neal stepped inside, his towering frame impossible to ignore. But today he wasn't dressed like an NBA legend or a business mogul. He wore a simple black hoodie, dark jeans, and sneakers. No designer suit, no flashy jewelry. Just an everyday man walking into a world where only the elite were welcome. Eyes turned toward him instantly. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Employees at their desks exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from curiosity to quiet judgment. Lauren, the receptionist, barely glanced up from her desk. She took in Shaq's casual outfit, his lack of an expensive briefcase, and the absence of an assistant trailing behind him. Then she sighed, clearly annoyed. "Maintenance is through the back entrance." Her tone was dismissive, cold, and impatient. Shaq raised an eyebrow, his lips twitching slightly as if suppressing a smirk. "Oh? That's so?" Lauren exhaled sharply, finally looking up at him fully. Her face changed. She recognized him. The way her eyes widened for a fraction of a second gave her away. But instead of apologizing, she covered it with an awkward laugh. "Sorry, sir, but are you lost?" she asked. Shaq chuckled, shaking his head. He had seen this before. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough to make her nervous. "I have a meeting with Grant Hartman," he said, his deep voice calm but firm. Lauren blinked, then let out an almost mocking scoff. "I highly doubt that," she muttered under her breath. Unfortunately for her, someone else heard it too. A deep, booming laugh echoed across the lobby. "You have a meeting with me." Shaq turned to see Grant Hartman, CEO of Hartman Capital, standing just a few feet away. He was a tall, silver-haired man in an overpriced, tailored suit, flanked by two executives in designer watches. He took one look at Shaq's hoodie and grinned like he had just heard the best joke of his life. "That's rich," Hartman chuckled, shaking his head. His colleagues smirked, some even chuckling along. Shaq said nothing. He just stood there watching. Hartman's smile widened. This was entertainment for him. A rich CEO looking down on a man he assumed was beneath him. "Tell you what," Hartman finally said, rubbing his chin as if deep in thought. "Since I'm feeling generous today, I'll give you—" He glanced at his luxury gold watch, then smirked. "5 minutes." The executive snickered. Lauren smirked, folding her arms. But Shaq? He smiled, because Hartman just made the biggest mistake of his career. Hartman has no idea who he just underestimated. Shaq stepped into the glass-walled conference room, his presence alone enough to make the air feel heavier. The room was sleek, modern, exactly what you'd expect from Hartman Capital, a firm that catered only to the wealthiest of the wealthy. A long, polished mahogany table stretched across the space, surrounded by suited executives who clearly thought they were the smartest men in the room. Grant Hartman sat at the head of the table, his signature arrogance on full display as he leaned back in his leather chair, twirling a Mont Blanc pen between his fingers. His custom-tailored navy suit and gold cufflinks practically screamed old money privilege. Across from him, Shaq remained unbothered. He didn't need to flash wealth to prove his worth. He let his presence do that for him. "All right," Hartman sighed dramatically. "Let's hear it. You've got 5 minutes." Shaq nodded, composed, and began his pitch. "I'm proposing an equity partnership in sports ventures, focusing on athlete-driven investments that—" Hartman lifted a hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. "Let me stop you right there," Hartman interrupted, smirking. "You're telling me you want to bring, what, basketball money into high-stakes investments?" The executives chuckled under their breath. Shaq tilted his head slightly, observing. I want to bring strategic capital into a growing market, he clarified. Hartman scoffed, exchanging a glance with Lauren, who stood by the door, arms folded, her expression smug. This isn't a charity, Mr. O'Neill, Hartman said, dragging out Shaq's last name like it didn't belong in his world. We don't throw money at gimmicks. We build real businesses. Shaq didn't flinch. I own real businesses. Oh, sure, Hartman said, waving a dismissive hand. Sneaker deals, fast food chains, maybe a car wash or two. But this? He gestured at the table. This is the big leagues. Lauren stifled a laugh, the sound barely concealed. The executive smirked. Shaq sat back, his massive frame making the chair look too small for him. His eyes flicked to Hartman's Rolex, then to the framed magazine covers on the wall featuring the CEO's face. I see, Shaq murmured. Hartman raised a brow, mistaking Shaq's measured silence for hesitation. Look, I respect what you've done, Hartman continued, in a tone that made it clear he didn't. You made a name for yourself. You're a legend, on the court. But business? That's a different game. Shaq's lips curled into a slow smirk. You sure about that? Hartman had no idea what was coming next. Shaq had dealt with arrogance before. He had walked into rooms full of billionaires who thought they ran the world, men who measured their worth in stocks and holdings, who looked at athletes like they were entertainment, not equals. But Grant Hartman? He was something else entirely. Hartman wasn't just wealthy, he was entitled. The kind of man who didn't just think he was above others. He believed it was his right. And right now, as he lounged back in his oversized leather chair, he was about to make the biggest mistake of his career. Hartman exhaled sharply, shaking his head in amusement. Let me guess, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. You're here to beg for a loan? The room burst into laughter. Shaq sat perfectly still. He didn't shift, didn't blink, didn't react. He just watched. He studied the way Lauren stifled a smirk, how the other executives exchanged knowing glances, like they were all in on some inside joke. Hartman chuckled, shaking his head. Man, this is priceless, he said. What did you think was going to happen? You'd waltz in here, pitch some cute little investment idea, and we'd just, what? Hand over millions? His grin widened. He was enjoying this. Athletes don't build empires, Hartman continued, crossing his arms. They play, and when they're done, they go broke. That's just the way it works. He let the words sit there, expecting Shaq to react. But Shaq just breathed in deeply, fingers laced together, his posture calm, controlled. Hartman wasn't done. Oh, don't take it personally, he said, chuckling. You've done well for yourself, really. A few sneaker deals, a restaurant chain or two. I respect the hustle. But real business? That's a different game. Shaq's jaw tightened ever so slightly. Hartman caught it, and it only fueled his amusement. See? That's the difference between us, Shaq. Guys like me? Hartman tapped his temple. We think. We build. We run the world. He leaned forward slightly, his smirk growing sharper. And guys like you. Hartman let the words hang before delivering the final blow. You entertain us. Silence. Even the executives stopped laughing. Lauren shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Shaq sat there, completely still, expression unreadable. The casual, easygoing Shaq, gone. His usual smile, vanished. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with absolute control, Shaq sat up straight, adjusting his sleeves. His towering presence seemed even larger now, the air around him charged. Hartman's smirk wavered just a little. Shaq's voice was calm even. Okay, he said, rising from his chair. I'll see myself out. Hartman smirked, thinking he had won. He had no idea. Shaq was about to change everything. Shaq's footsteps echoed through the grand marble lobby of Hartman Capital as he walked toward the exit, his broad shoulders relaxed, his expression unreadable. Behind him, the boardroom was still buzzing with laughter, the echoes of Hartman's arrogance clinging to the air like a bad smell. Guys like you should stick to entertainment. Hartman had said the words so casually, as if dismissing one of the wealthiest athletes turned businessmen in history was just another Tuesday for him. Shaq had heard worse in his lifetime. But there was one thing he had zero patience for, being underestimated. Just as he reached the glass doors, a voice called out behind him. Didn't last long, huh? It was Lauren, the receptionist. She leaned against the front desk, smirking, arms crossed. Guess you weren't big enough for this place after all. A few other employees nearby snickered, enjoying the show. Shaq paused, then turned slightly, his towering frame casting a long shadow over her desk. He pulled out his phone, dialed. "Hey," he said casually, "I want to make a major acquisition." Lauren's smirk faltered. Shaq held her gaze for a second, longer, then stepped outside into the crisp evening air. Across the city, in a sleek high-rise office, a team of corporate lawyers sat in a private conference room, poring over financial statements, legal clauses, and shareholder reports. A large monitor displayed a live document labeled Target Acquisition, Hartman Capital. One of the senior attorneys, Ethan Price, leaned back in his chair, adjusting his glasses. He tapped his pen on the table. "Hartman doesn't even realize it yet," he said, shaking his head. "But as of tonight, his company isn't his anymore." Another attorney, Samantha Lee, smirked. "He should have done his homework," she muttered, scrolling through Shaq's financial portfolio. "His net worth alone can swallow Hartman's entire operation without blinking." Ethan nodded. "Let's send the offer through official channels. I want this on Hartman's desk first thing in the morning." He clicked a button, and with that, the takeover had begun. Grant Hartman had never lost a fight in his life. At least that's what he told himself. His empire was untouchable, his wealth endless. Or so he thought. Late that night, in his penthouse suite, Hartman poured himself a drink, basking in his latest victory. The city skyline stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. He was still amused by the day's events. "Shaquille O'Neal," he muttered to himself with a smirk, "thinking he could play in my world." Then his phone buzzed. A message from his assistant. "Sir, urgent legal notice from O'Neal's team. You need to see this. Now." Hartman's smirk vanished. Frowning, he tapped open the document. His eyes scanned the first few lines, then stopped cold. His glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor. Shaquille O'Neal had just placed a formal offer. To buy Hartman Capital. Hartman's breath caught in his throat. His empire wasn't as untouchable as he thought. Grant Hartman sat at his polished mahogany desk, the city skyline glowing behind him. His penthouse office, perched at the top of Hartman Tower, was a symbol of power. His power, or so he thought. A thick envelope sat in front of him, hand-delivered by his assistant, Daniel. The logo at the top, a law firm he didn't recognize. "Sir, you need to see this," Daniel had said, his voice oddly tight. Hartman had barely glanced at it, too busy celebrating what he assumed was yet another victory. That idiot, Shaquille O'Neal, had been humiliated and sent packing. But now, with a drink in one hand, he casually peeled open the envelope, and his world stopped. The first line hit him like a freight train. "Acquisition offer, Shaquille O'Neal. Holdings proposes full purchase of Hartman Capital." Hartman blinked. Once, twice. Then he laughed, loud. A booming, arrogant laugh that echoed off the sleek marble walls. "Oh, this is rich," he scoffed, shaking his head. "He thinks he can—" But then his eyes caught the numbers. The laughter died in his throat. His fingers tightened around the pages as he read the valuation figures, the amount Shaq was offering. Hartman's face drained of color. This wasn't possible. Shaquille O'Neal wasn't this rich. His mind raced, trying to rationalize. Endorsements, NBA money, sneakers. No way that added up to. But as he kept reading, his stomach twisted. The law firm had attached a breakdown of Shaq's financial empire. Sports ventures, franchises, tech investments, real estate, holdings across multiple industries. The numbers didn't lie. Shaquille O'Neal could buy Hartman Capital in cash and still have billions left to play with. Hartman felt dizzy. His empire, his legacy, was being swallowed whole by a man he had mocked to his face. His hands shook as he grabbed the intercom. "Get the boardroom on a call, now." Daniel, still standing at the doorway, hesitated, his lips pressed together like he was debating something. Hartman narrowed his eyes. "What?" Daniel swallowed hard, then spoke. "Sir, we might have to accept the offer." Hartman gripped the edge of his desk, his perfect world crumbling. Grant Hartman had spent years building his reputation as a ruthless businessman. But right now, he looked like a man on the verge of collapse. The papers in his hands felt heavier than they should. His once proud smirk was gone, replaced by something tight and panicked. His empire, his life's work, was about to be bought out by a man he had laughed at. "Not on my watch." He snatched his phone off the desk, stabbing the boardroom's direct line with his thumb. The line rang, once, twice, then clicked. "This is Hartman," he barked. "We need an emergency vote. Block the sale. Now." A brief silence. Then a calm but firm voice responded. "Mr. Hartman," said Richard Calloway, the head of the board, "we've already reviewed the offer." Hartman froze. "What?" His grip tightened around the phone. "You reviewed it? Without me?" Another pause. Then, "Shaquille O'Neal is offering 3 times what the company is worth." Hartman's chest constricted. He staggered back into his chair, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. "That's absurd," he muttered. "He's overpaying." Calloway sighed. "And yet it's a deal too good to refuse." Hartman's palm slammed against his desk. "Number. Listen to me. If we sell, we lose control. This is our company." "Correction," Calloway said smoothly. It was. The words sliced through Hartman like a knife. He gritted his teeth. They were all turning on him. "This is madness," he spat. "You're selling us out to a former basketball player." A sharp silence on the other end. Then Calloway chuckled. "Grant, have you seen his portfolio?" Hartman's stomach churned. "We're talking about a man who owns franchises, tech startups, production companies. He's a financial powerhouse," Calloway continued. "And unlike you, he actually knows how to adapt." Hartman's hands curled into tight fists. "You can't do this," he hissed. Calloway's tone turned ice cold. "The board has already voted." Hartman's breath caught in his throat. "Wait!" Click. The line went dead. For a moment, silence. Then, Hartman exploded. "Damn it!" His coffee mug shattered against the wall. Papers scattered off his desk. His heart pounded in his ears. This couldn't be happening. Not to him. Not to Grant Hartman. He shoved back his chair, his movements jerky with rage. If the board wouldn't stop this sale, then there was only one person left to convince. He stormed toward the door, barking at his assistant. "Get me a meeting with Shaq." Now Hartman wasn't going down without a fight. But was it already too late? Grant Hartman had always been in control. The man with the power, the man who called the shots. But today, he was sweating. Sitting behind his mahogany desk, his fingers drummed nervously against the polished wood. His jaw was tight, his once pristine suit now slightly wrinkled from the stress of the last 24 hours. And across from him, Shaquille O'Neal. Not in a hoodie, not in jeans. Number Shaq sat calmly, confidently, in a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than the chairs in this overpriced office. His diamond-studded watch glinted under the light, his hands folded in front of him as if he had all the time in the world. Hartman swallowed. The power dynamic had flipped. "Let's talk," he finally managed, forcing a weak smile. Shaq raised an eyebrow. Then he chuckled. "Oh, now you want to talk?" He leaned back, arms crossed. "You sure? I wouldn't want to waste your precious time." Hartman flinched. The same words he had mocked Shaq with just a day ago were now coming back to haunt him. Before he could speak, the door opened. Lauren, his ever-loyal receptionist, strode in, holding a folder of reports. She barely glanced at Shaq before turning to Hartman. "Sir, we have an urgent—" Then she stopped, blinking, staring, her face twisted in confusion as her brain tried to make sense of the scene in front of her. Shaq, in a designer suit, sitting comfortably in a chair reserved for the firm's biggest investors. Lauren frowned as if something didn't add up. Her tone turned skeptical. Do you need me to escort him out?" The room fell dead silent. Shaq's lips curled into a smirk. Hartman let out a strained, nervous laugh. Lauren, actually, Mr. O'Neal is an investor." Lauren's face dropped. "What?" Shaq turned slightly in his chair, his massive frame towering over her even while seated. "Surprised?" His voice was calm, almost amused. "I mean, last time I was here, you thought I was the janitor." Lauren stiffened. Hartman cleared his throat. "Lauren, I think we'll take it from here." Lauren nodded slowly, looking like she wanted to disappear. She turned on her heel and hurried out, her face flushed with embarrassment. Shaq let the silence hang for a moment. Then he tilted his head at Hartman. "So," he said, his deep voice smooth but firm, "you still think I don't belong in the investment world?" Hartman ran a shaky hand through his hair. He had no escape now. He leaned forward, swallowing his pride. I made a mistake," he muttered. Shaq's gaze didn't waver. "You're going to have to be more specific," he said, his voice like stone. Hartman was about to find out that sorry wouldn't be enough. Grant Hartman's palms were slick with sweat. The once powerful CEO of Hartman Capital sat rigid at the long, polished boardroom table. Around him, his own executives and shareholders sat watching in silence, their faces unreadable, but all eyes were on the screen. Shaq leaned forward, remote in hand, as the security footage played on the massive television. On screen, there was Hartman himself, laughing, shaking his head as Shaq stood in the lobby. "You? Have a meeting with me? That's rich. Maybe try the janitor's entrance. Guys like you should stick to entertainment. Business is for real thinkers." The words echoed through the room. Shaq pressed pause. A heavy silence fell. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some exchanged glances. Others stared at Hartman with open disappointment. Shaq let the moment hang. Then he leaned in, his voice smooth but sharp. "You treated me like garbage," he said, his tone casual, but the weight behind it was undeniable. Then with the slightest smirk, he added, "Now, I own this place." Hartman swallowed. His face burned red, as if he could feel the humiliation settling into his bones. Look, he stammered. I wasn't serious. It was just a misunderstanding." Shaq tilted his head, amused. "Oh? A misunderstanding?" His finger hovered over the remote. Click. Another clip played. This time, Lauren, the receptionist. "Sir, the maintenance entrance is in the back." More murmurs rippled through the room. Click. The footage shifted again. Lauren snickering as Shaq left. Hartman flinched. Shaq let the footage run for a few more seconds before turning the screen off completely. He turned to the board. "This is the leadership you've been trusting with your company?" Silence. Then, one of the senior partners, a woman in her mid-50s, crossed her arms and shook her head. "This is disgraceful," she muttered. Another board member sighed. "Grant, this is bad." Hartman's hands clenched into fists. No, he said quickly. "I can fix this. We can do damage control. I'll issue an apology. We'll handle this internally." Shaq chuckled. "Damage control?" he repeated as if tasting the words. Then he shook his head. "Nah. See, here's the thing." He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with a slow, deliberate motion. "I didn't come here to fix your reputation." Then he turned to the board. "I came here to fix the company." Hartman suddenly realized he wasn't just humiliated. He was about to be fired. Grant Hartman's world was collapsing. For years, he had been the untouchable CEO of Hartman Capital, a man feared, respected, and admired. But now, he sat slumped in his leather chair, staring at Shaquille O'Neal, the man he had mocked, humiliated, and dismissed as a nobody. Shaq sat across from him, relaxed, completely in control. His presence filled the room like a storm brewing over the ocean, calm on the surface but powerful enough to wipe out everything in its path. The boardroom was dead silent, except for the soft tapping of Shaq's fingers on the table. Waiting, watching. Hartman licked his lips, his throat dry as sandpaper. He still had one last card to play. He cleared his throat. "Look," he said, forcing a chuckle that sounded hollow, desperate. "I get it. You're the boss now. You made your point." Shaq didn't respond, just stared. Hartman shifted in his seat, leaning forward. "Let's be reasonable, Shaq. I'll resign, gracefully. No drama, no bad press, just a quiet exit, and we move on." Shaq finally tilted his head as if considering it. Then he chuckled. "Oh no," he said, shaking his head slowly. "You're getting publicly fired." Hartman's stomach dropped. A cold chill crawled up his spine as murmurs filled the room. The board members exchanged glances, some surprised, others nodding in agreement. "You can't do that," Hartman snapped, panic creeping into his voice. "This is my company." Shaq leaned back, arms crossed, completely unbothered. "Correction." He tapped the table. "This was your company." Hartman's face flushed red. He turned to the board, looking for support. "You can't let him do this. I built this firm from the ground up." One of the senior executives, a man who had worked with Hartman for over a decade, sighed heavily. "Grant," he said, his tone almost pitying, "you built it, yeah, but you also buried it." Hartman's chest tightened. "What the hell does that mean?" The executive gestured to the security footage still frozen on the screen. The footage of Hartman mocking Shaq, belittling him, treating him like nothing. "It means you did this to yourself." Shaq stood up, straightening his jacket. "You didn't just insult me, Grant. You insulted your own company, your employees, your clients. He pulled out his phone. Tap. Within seconds, a notification popped up on every screen in the boardroom. Hartman frowned, his fingers trembling as he picked up his phone. His blood ran cold. The headline, "Arrogant CEO gets bought out by Shaquille O'Neal and fired in front of his own board." A breaking news banner flashed across business news channels. Twitter was already exploding. Hartman fired. Arn Irish Sean Shaq takes over. Karma. Hartman felt sick. He shot up from his chair. You had this planned? Shaq smirked. I told you. I don't play checkers. I play chess. The board members slowly stood, one by one, until everyone in the room was on their feet, except Hartman. A security guard stepped inside. Shaq gestured toward Hartman. Escort him out. Hartman watches, humiliated, as his name is erased from his own company. Lauren smirked as she strolled into the boardroom, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She had been watching everything unfold from the sidelines, convinced that she was safe. Sure, Grant Hartman was gone. But her? She was untouchable. After all, she had been working at Hartman Capital for years. She had connections. She knew the inner workings of the firm like the back of her hand. And besides, it wasn't like she had done anything that bad. She folded her arms, feigning confidence, and took a seat across from Shaq, the new CEO. Mr. O'Neal, she said with an exaggerated politeness, I assume you called me in to discuss my role in this exciting new transition? Shaq leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching her with an expression unreadable. Then he picked up a remote, pointed it at the massive screen behind him, and pressed play. Lauren's stomach dropped. On the screen, security footage from the firm's lobby played. There she was, mocking Shaq the moment he walked in. The maintenance entrance is in the back, snickering as Hartman humiliated him, rolling her eyes when he tried to present his business proposal, whispering to another employee, he doesn't belong here. Lauren's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to speak, but Shaq held up a hand. Nah, he said calmly. Let's watch a little more. The video continued. This time it showed her reaction after Shaq walked out. Didn't last long, huh? She had sneered to a coworker. The boardroom was dead silent. Shaq finally turned back to her. You see, he said, his voice steady, Hartman was just one problem. But you're another. Lauren's breath hitched. Mr. O'Neal, Security. Lauren froze. Two security guards stepped forward. She jumped up from her chair. Wait, I didn't mean anything by it. It was just... Shaq raised an eyebrow. Just what? Lauren stammered, her carefully built arrogance crumbling. I was just doing my job, she blurted. It was just a joke. Shaq shook his head, unimpressed. If you think disrespecting people is part of your job, he said, then you don't deserve to work here. The guards grabbed her by the arms. Her smirk was gone, replaced by pure panic. No, please, Mr. O'Neal. This company is all I have. Please. Shaq didn't move, didn't blink, didn't care. He simply nodded at the guards. Lauren's cries echoed through the hallway as she was dragged out of the building. The air inside the boardroom felt different. Gone was the arrogance, the snobbery, the exclusive old boys club atmosphere that had once defined Hartman Capital. In its place, a new era was beginning. Shaq stood at the head of the table, his towering frame commanding the room, not with intimidation, but with quiet, undeniable presence. The same executives who had smirked at him just days ago now hung onto his every word. Let me be clear, Shaq said, his deep voice steady and firm. I didn't buy this company to destroy it. I bought it to fix it. The executives exchanged uneasy glances. Shaq placed his hands on the table, leaning forward slightly. This firm had potential, but under its last leadership, it was stuck in the past. That ends today. A silence followed. Then, Shaq began listing his changes. New policies on diversity and inclusion, a complete restructuring of the hiring process, better treatment of employees, bonuses, incentives, fair promotions, new investments in industries beyond the old money elite, tech, sports, and entertainment. One of the older board members, Mr. Lancaster, hesitated before raising a hand. With all due respect, Mr. O'Neal, these changes are, well, quite drastic. Shaq nodded. They are, and that's exactly why they're going to work. Lancaster leaned back, not convinced. Shaq reached for a remote, pressing a button. Behind him, a massive screen lit up with numbers, projections, and market trends. These, Shaq said, pointing at the screen, are the industries where real money is being made today. He highlighted the rapid growth of sports investments, the tech boom, the entertainment industry's financial dominance. This firm has been ignoring billions of dollars in opportunity because it was too busy playing gatekeeper to the so-called elite. Shaq's eyes locked onto Lancaster's. Tell me I'm wrong. The room was silent. Another executive, Ms. Reynolds, the only female board member, cleared her throat. I have to admit, these numbers are incredible. Shaq nodded. Listen, he continued, his voice calm but firm. I know some of you don't like change, but change is coming, with or without you. He let that sink in before delivering his final blow. I'll give everyone here one chance to either adapt or leave. 1 week later, the results were undeniable. Hartman Capital's stock shot up overnight. Major investors flocked to the company, eager to be part of its new direction. Shaq's business model proved far more effective than Hartman's ever was. And across town, Grant Hartman sat alone in his penthouse, staring at his television. On the screen, a breaking news segment. Hartman Capital, now under Shaquille O'Neal's leadership, sees record-breaking growth. Hartman's jaw. Anywhere. A single caption had been added. This is how you handle injustice. Justice for Shaq. Jake hesitated for only a second before hitting post. Within minutes, the notifications exploded. The video spread like wildfire. By the time the sun rose the next morning, it was already #1 trending on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Justice for Shaq wasn't just a hashtag, it was a movement. Celebrities, athletes, and activists jumped in immediately. This is exactly why we keep our cameras rolling. Shaq handled this perfectly. LeBron James. If Shaq wasn't a celebrity, this could have ended differently. Let that sink in. Kerry Washington. Corrupt cops and racist managers? Yeah, this story needed to be told. Nush, justice for Shaq. Trevor Noah, thousands of retweets turned into millions. And then came the fallout. The gas station's corporate office released a statement by noon. We have officially terminated Brian, effective immediately. Discrimination has no place in our stores. Our team is reviewing new policies to prevent this from happening again. Miller's case, it escalated fast. By afternoon, Internal Affairs had launched a full investigation. Every case he had ever worked on was now under review. Multiple complaints surfaced overnight. Citizens came forward with stories of wrongful arrests, excessive force, and abuse of power. His career wasn't just over, it was being dismantled. Back at the gas station, Jake showed up to work the next morning to a surprise. His manager pulled him aside. Corporate called, Moss, the man said. They want to promote you. Jake blinked. Wait, what? The manager chuckled. They're calling it an act of integrity. Congrats, kid. Meanwhile, Troy, Shaq had already handled that. As Troy walked to his car, he stopped short, eyes widening. A bright yellow sticky note sat on his windshield. Scrawled in bold letters, your gas is covered for the rest of the year. Shaq. Troy shook his head, grinning. Man, this dude's something else. He sat back in his car, watching the world react. He didn't need credit, he didn't need applause. He had seen an injustice, and he had done something. As he pulled out of his driveway, he chuckled to himself. Some people never learn. As Hartman hung up, he stared at the job offer, realizing this was the lowest point of his life.